Because headphones is a weird one, what we've been listening to for 50 years, because I've started all of this by talking about the microphone there and the microphone there to give you this phantom stereo image idea. And then what we've also been doing for roughly the same amount of time, because some bright sparks, I don't want to hear what you're listening to, it probably came around from, I don't know, some kind of communications, telecoms or whatever, but ultimately private listening, where it came to stereo, was taking that speaker and firing it directly into your ears. So at that point, if you actually think about that, how you're completely disassociated with the real life experience that has been designed by science, which is just the angles. The angles sitting in this spot with 60 degrees apart, if you're sitting in this spot, you're getting the perfect angle for that stereo recording. Of course, as I've explained, all of those things then developed and became music production rather than, you know, official recording. But what we've also been doing is taking those boxes and firing them directly into our ears. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of, well, what do you do then if you want to have immersive sound on headphones? How do you go about that? I'm sure you've all seen a dummy head with speakers in the ears. The head is designed to be roughly the same weight as a normal head, human head. And you know, the microphones are set where the ears are, with the ear, you know, with the pinners and all of that stuff built into it. So technically speaking, if you wanted the perfect, and it's a good studio, so if you wanted the perfect binaural experience of this track, forget about, actually in stereo, just anything, play anything through these two speakers. You could sit the dummy head here at the sweet spot that's been calibrated for here, and then you could record the two outputs of that to two channels, which you then play back through headphones only, not through speakers because it'll be ridiculous, but through headphones only. If they go to your ears, then at that point you're the same as that dummy head, and you're getting precisely the same experience as you would have done sitting here in this room. So I could take that two-channel recording in my headphones and I could go and sit in the next room, or I could go back to my hotel or whatever and listen to it, and it would sound the same as it does in this room. And I think that's a key thing to get your head around when you're thinking about binaural mixing, because, well, that's great. It sounds the way it did when I mixed it in that room. But remember, we've been used to listening to the dry, raw stuff coming out of those speakers with no crosstalk, no additional space or movement around it, no reflections of anything of any sort. So we've been used to dry as hell. So if you think about a lead vocal on a U67 or a U47 sang like that, with that much space on a Radiohead track, for want of a much better example, you know, Tom York's there, there's a capsule, there's his mouth, and that's how he sings, and you get that much, you know, that much sort of distance. Typically, you might, you know, then record that, of course, and then place that as a phantom in stereo. You'd place that in the middle, so it's coming equally from both speakers to make it appear like it's coming from the middle. And then you might go, well, I like the dryness of this vocal, but I want some reverb on top with a bit of delay, so you pile a load of that stuff on and that sits there. But ultimately, you're still hearing that vocal, even with Florence and the Machine, where there's tons of reverb, you still actually somewhere in there get the direct thing. And the experience you then get on headphones from taking that, putting it on your ears and listening that way, is it might as well be two Tom York singing directly into your ears. That's what you get. You don't get any crosstalk. It doesn't feel like it's coming from there. It's being pumped into here. So that's what you're getting. Of course, they're completely in phase, so it's equal, but that's what you get. And that's the sound of pop music and rock music and any vocal. And I'm using vocal as an example because it's the best example, but other instruments as well, of course, and other recordings, and not necessarily just microphones, also synthesizers and all of that. You can get a bone dry synthesizer, which obviously doesn't have any, you know, like a 70s synth, it doesn't have any reverb. And if you just place that sound there, then when you listen to it here, it will be coming from there, it will be dry. You don't get any of the benefit of whatever reflection you have in the room that you happen to be in. So if we were to mix something in a super fantastic Atmos mix in this room right now, and we said, right, what's the perfect way of listening to this on headphones? Capture it with a dummy head, the best dummy head you can possibly buy, record those two channels, and that's your perfect binaural recording. And that will give you the perfect experience of how you mixed it in this room. The problem is that when you start walking down the road and you listen to that, the first thing you're going to do is say, where's all that bloody reverb come from? Why does it sound like it's in a box? I thought our studio sounded better than that. It's weird, something's wrong, there's something wrong with the technology. And that's because we're completely programmed because we've been listening to something which is technically weird for 50 years, but we all know it and love it. And anything outside of that automatically sounds different and strange. And you might say, yeah, I feel immersed, but it just sounds like a reverb. And that's where we have these things called binaural metadata settings, which is what I'm kind of getting around to now, where you've got the ability to, for anything on the left there, any of those 128 things, whether that's an object or whether that's a particular channel in the bed, to set that to off, near, mid, and far. Now, if you think about this room, I would say, difficult to judge, but I would say that if you were to set all of those things to somewhere between mid and near and mid, probably mid. If you were set to everything, it would actually sound quite like it does in this room. So I've worked at it's like a very, very big record, a huge record from the 80s, got redone in Atmos beginning of last year, maybe the end of the one before. And the guy who was mixing it, mixed it in the room, fantastic. And he was new to it, but it was, a huge record, but he was doing such a great job, and he sort of gave me a call and said, "Why don't do you want to come down and listen to it?" It's like, yeah, of course, no problem. And it was great. And it's like, wow, you've really taken to this. It's quite easy to do. You just move stuff around and place it. And as long as you've got the artistic kind of, approval for a start to be able to do that with such a classic record, and you're going to make good decisions, fantastic. It's really easy to do a good speaker mix in Dolby Atmos. And they said, and the great thing is, listen, gave me the headphones and said, it sounds exactly the same, like exactly the same. And sure enough, I was there, headphones on, pressing, cutting the speakers, putting the headphones on. And it was a bigger studio than this, and everything was set to mid. It sounded precisely the same. So he thought he was done. He was about to deliver it. And that was, of course he was, because he was really happy. So the thing was, I said, no, let's just stop. Let's just go on. Let's just take the binaural render, which is the 2-channel version, which is the thing you're hearing in your ears, the equivalent of that dummy head recording, and let's just go for a coffee, and then we'll have a chat, and then on the way back we'll have a listen to it on headphones. Okay, fine, which we did. And the first thing he said is, what have you done? What went wrong? It's like, oh, no, nothing. That's what you've been listening to. No, it's not. I mean, it didn't get to fighting, but he was absolutely adamant that something had changed, and of course it hadn't. It's just that we were now in that environment. We were walking down the street in Chiswick. We weren't in that studio anymore. And so your surroundings have got a lot to do with it. I think that psycho, acoustic thing where I'm in this room, so whether I've got headphones on and it's a model of this room or a very, very, very similar room, it doesn't matter because I'm here and I'm comfortable. That's what I expect to hear. However, and back when I was an assistant, I would assist on tons of mix sessions where people wouldn't even bother listening on headphones at all, despite the fact that it was technically a very different experience, because they had just had to trust the whole system that had been built up over the years, mix it so it sounds great through these two speakers, the headphones will be what they're going to be. There's nothing I can do any different for that. So as long as I know that I mix it brilliantly on NS10s or whatever, then the headphones are the headphones and it'll be fine. But of course, that's a completely different thing when you've got stuff behind your head, above your head. So for every object here, you can have that set to off, near, mid, and far. Off is the equivalent of that one object. So let's say it's a flute that's there. Off is the equivalent of how you would hear that flute in solo when that's been folded down to the 2 channels. Hopefully you keep up with that. So the flute's around there, but you're listening to that, well, the equivalent of pressing. Is this going to work? Probably not, maybe, who knows? Yeah, okay. So that is the fold down. Those binaural settings that I just set will be affecting, sorry, the trim and down mix settings will be affecting it. You're now listening to the stereo version of this mix. So in that case, why is there a piano? So let's say the piano is here. It's now there in stereo. Well, I'm jumping all over the place here, but that's in stereo. So on the headphones switched to off, that piano would be coming to you like stereo, there and there, wherever it is in the room, and there wouldn't be any sense of it being around you, wouldn't be able to. If you then set that to near, then the headphone processing, the headphone space is an anechoic chamber. So it's small. It's not necessarily smaller than this room, but there's no reflection, completely no reflection. So you get the crosstalk, you get the filtering around you. It takes into account the dummy head. And in fact, you would also do have the ability to bring in your own personal headphone-related transfer function setting where you can scan your head so it's more tailored to your head than the kind of global average. the G.I. Joe kind of head, but you get the general idea. So with near, it's the equivalent of an anechoic chamber. With mid, it's a room that's a bit bigger than this, and with far, it's a room that's bigger still. And with careful choices with that, you can then build on top of your speaker mix. The speaker mix in a calibrated room, it should and will translate absolutely everywhere. However, for headphones, you've got the ability now to sort of do a little bit more with that, to tailor that so you can dry things up all the way down to the equivalent of a stereo experience. So let's say it was that Tom York example and you wanted that vocal to sound exactly as it did in the headphones, because there's something so magical about that you can't possibly change it. You just make that the same as the stereo with the binaural switched to off, and you get the same vocal sound as you did for the original. Meanwhile, you know, Johnny Greenwood's guitars and all of that might be set to near, and one of those little things might be set to far, you know. So you've got the ability, and it's really important that you do look at that experience, because it's 80% of all listening is headphones. So you don't just leave it to chance. You make sure. I can keep going with examples of this. I had an A&R person call up a little while ago saying, can I just send you a mix? Is this person a good Atmos engineer? It's like, okay, fine, send it. And I listened to it, and it was beautiful. Like, it was a really, really amazing record. It was a female singer-songwriter, quite folky, but there was some noises and stuff going around. He'd done it in a really great studio. There's a kind of a naming convention, so I worked out what studio he'd done it in. And it was fantastic. It was done with such love that you could tell it was the person that had been recording with that artist, you know, producing that artist and done all the mix. It was superb, really good. So I was about to email the A&R guy back and say, what are you on about? This is fantastic. And I thought, oh, I better check it on headphones. Sure enough, I put it on. Everything had been set to mid, which is how it comes in as a default. So that super close vocal with super intimate guitar. Meanwhile, that other stuff kind of was all around you with some reverb on stuff. The entire thing just went, you know, and it no longer sounded like the record. I mean, frankly, it just that one thing just made it sound kind of rubbish. So, and obviously the NR's experience of that was listening on headphones. So it's really important that you kind of get to grips with that, I think. But then let's move on to the DAWs. So you mentioned Logic before, and you're working in that. That was one of the first to integrate Atmos into it about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, something like that. And yeah, it's great. I mean, literally all you do is you're working on your session, save it and save it as again so that you're not destroying what you've been working on. And then switch it on, and you've got something that looks very like that. You've got a space. You've probably done it a little bit already. Make sure your output is set to binaural. And at that point, you have the off, near, mid, and far settings that we have, and you can work that way. If you're working outside of this room because you can't get in here all the time, I would suggest this is a personal preference, but I think there's some, at least personal science behind it. I would suggest that you work with everything set to near, because in my experience, you know, so every time you bring an object in or start a new track, if you set everything to near, remember that's an anechoic chamber. So I believe, and I just know that you're going to make good spatial decisions on that front, because you can hear it moving around you, you can feel it panning around you when you move something around you. It's not just stereo. So you've got that, but you don't have additional reflections. So you're not going to start, if you're working with stereo stems, you're not suddenly going to start turning the vocal stem, the vocal reverb stem down because it starts feeling too big. If it's set to near, it will sound appropriate, and you can trust that that's exactly the same, especially if that's something you've worked on in stereo first. So I would say on headphones, working at home, on your laptop, wherever you are that's not in a room with multiple speakers, I would suggest work with near. That will get you, I think, as you learn it, that could get you to, I think, 80 or even 90% of a mix could be done just on headphones. And that's efficient, you know, because obviously time is money and all of that kind of stuff. And it's nice to be able to just sit there and do that wherever you are. So I've delivered a couple of things where I've done exactly that. I've worked on headphones to about 80 or 90% of the mix, done all the boring template stuff, done the chopping up and, you know, labeling and things like that. And then got to that point and then taken it into a studio like this. I think it's crucial that you do, because there are other elements to this rather than just working on headphones. Yes, it's 80% of listening is headphones, but that's not, you know, that's the same as true of stereo, and you wouldn't just mix a stereo on headphones. So think about when you then hear that track you've mixed, you know, when you're getting your haircuts at the hairdressers or barbers, or if you're in a cafe, or when you want to listen to it at home, you know, and you might have that device, because I think it's, you know, there are these devices coming where you'll be hearing Atmos in a car, in, you know, in all of these different locations, on a soundbar, through a TV, you know. So of course, it's absolutely crucial that you get it right for speakers and for headphones. So if you're start on headphones, set everything to near, bring it into a studio, and I would say at that point, there are things you would need to look at which you haven't been able to really properly look at with headphones. So LFE, subwoofer. We had a question earlier on about the difference, not about the difference between, but you know, should you have the bass management on and the LFE? So there's two boxes at the front, which I'm sure you've seen, and you noticed on this ADM that I was playing, I'll play another thing again in a minute, there's some stuff which is going to channel 4 of the bed, which is the dedicated LFE. That's a discrete send to the LFE. When you're sending stuff there, channel 4 there is actually a full range audio track, so you need to filter that down. It's full range kind of because it has to be, but you would everything you send there, let's say you've got a clangy, clicky Rickenbacker bass that you've got panned wherever, and then you're going to send some of that to the LFE. There's a lot of high-end frequency and mid in a Rickenbacker, but actually all you really want from the LFE is to augment the very bottom end, potentially. So if you send, let's say you've got the bass in the room somewhere, and you're also sending it to the subwoofer, to the LFE channel, you don't know what the capability of that subwoofer is. In this case, it's PMC. It's going to get quite high. It's pretty accurate. You know, it's not going to be. It's not just going to be moo. There's going to be some getting into the low mids, even up into the mids. So you need to control what's going to be going through that. It's a safe bet to say that most LFE is going to be able to reproduce from about 100 downwards, but anything from there, you just don't know what's going to happen, and you never know who's going to be using a PA speaker for a subwoofer or whatever. So do a low pass filter on the sends, is what I would always do. We could get into the nitty gritty of this, but we just don't have time. But if we sent to the LFE, put it through a low pass filter, so nothing above 120, for example, can get through. So therefore, if that can reproduce 170, you're not hearing it, and it's not muddying up this particular instance. You could even put a little bit of a limiter or a compressor on that, which is what I typically do, so that everything that's going there, kick, a bit of bass, bit of some, you know, whatever sound effects. LFE is low frequency effects. The best thing to think about it is that's augmenting the experience. The same is true of music. So don't just go, well, I've got a bass synth here, so the bass synth is going to go to the subwoofer. It doesn't work like that. Mix for the room like you would with stereo. Forgetting about that the subwoofer exists, I would always say mix as if it's full range all around you in the room and on headphones. So mix the way you want it to hear, the way you want to hear it, and then for any extra added oomph that you're not quite getting from there, just be very careful. With music specifically, I would say, you know, when you're looking at the 7.1, I would say the LFE channel, I mean, this is being kind of jokey and inaccurate rather than scientific, but I would never really let it get above there, depending on the, you know, on that, not let it get into the yellow particularly at all, unless it's something that's got a really massive explosion, this is a sound effect, or maybe an 808 that happens every so often that just really needs to shake the room, just at the bottom end. But mix for the room, full range, and add a little bit in there. But you will also notice when you add it in there, it also adds into the headphones, and you've got to be careful that you don't start rattling the headphones as well. So it's all trial and error, but once you get into it and you understand the processes, making sure you've got a filter on the LFE, maybe a compressor in that channel, making sure you understand what the binaural metadata settings are. And that's, I don't know, we've got headphones and we won't get a chance for everybody to listen, but once you do get up and running, a really good way of doing it is just to take a stereo thing that you know, or something really basic, you know, like an 8-track, multi-track, just pan some stuff around, and on the headphones, then just select them all at the same time. The way that you select, well, there's different ways for different routes, but within here we've got the binaural metadata settings. So in this case, for this track, I wasn't using the bed at all, so they're just switched to off. It doesn't make any difference because there's nothing going there. Objects 11 and 12, I can't remember what that was, possibly vocal, maybe drums. There's some mids, there's some nears, but when I started that on headphones, everything was set to near, just because I wanted to make sure that when I took it to the room, everything was going to be the right level and roughly the right levels of reverb and space. So that's how I ended up with this particular one. So that's where you find them on the renderer. You can also control those settings from a plugin on Pro Tools when you're using, or a DAW when you're using them as two separate entities. When you're working in Pro Tools now, and the similar kind of vibe with Logic, you'll find out where these things are when you find out where the objects are. In Pro Tools, for example, if we were working on the, where is it? Come on. Where is it? There we go. If we were working here, the place that they've actually put these metadata settings. So let's say that piano there, what was that? Object 14. So currently object 14 is set to, Dolby Atmos thing there, is currently set to mid. So if I want that to be near, I'll just set that. If I wanted them all to be near, it's all the usual stuff that you do with Pro Tools.
Logic's got a similar setup.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's actually Logic. This is in the I/O. The actually slightly irritating thing here at the moment is that you can't change these live. You have to stop. Well, you have to go into here, which stops the audio. Make the change, press OK, go back and listen. Maybe that'll be something that slickens up a bit so you can actually hear it changing.